So today we're going to be talking about the annual expense tracker and how to use this tool to improve next year's budget. And whether or not you had a budget this year, it does not matter. You can still participate in using this annual expense tracker. And towards the end of this video, I'll give you some extra tips on how to do that. But first of all, I would just like to talk about why you should track your expenses, and particularly on an annual basis. So, number one, tracking your expenses is not budgeting. It's not the same. Budgeting is a different sort of tool that you use, but tracking your expenses is a crucial part of budgeting, perhaps the most important part, one could argue, because if you do not track, it doesn't matter how perfectly you budget. You do not know whether you are over your budget, under your budget, hitting your budget. You have no idea. You don't know whether you can improve your budget or whether you are improving on your budget, because unless you're tracking, you don't know how you're actually aligning your actual practice with what you have budgeted. So it's very, very important. This is a crucial step to controlling your money instead of it controlling you. And that's why today we're going to talk about this annual expense tracker and how you can use it to improve your budget for next year, as well as review for this year. And this is a very helpful thing, particularly when you're doing your annual closeout of your budget. So this is December as we're having this video, as I'm recording, and within this month, I'll be closing out our budget for this year. And I'll be trying to finalize all of our amounts. And it's kind of a fun time of the year for me, honestly. Maybe I'll do a video on that later. But, you can track things like how much you paid on your mortgage, how much lower it is if you put extra money on your mortgage like we try to. You can track things like, what were all of our expenses throughout the year, which months were heavier, which ones were lighter. Oh, what were the reasons for that? Oh, because we had extra company. We had all of our children home at that month, or whatever the case might be. So there's lots of fun stuff you can do with your budget closeout at the end of the year. And I just find that a really fun and exciting time, and it kind of puts you on a good trajectory for the following year. So join me as we talk about our annual expense tracker. Okay, so for first timers, if you have not been tracking your expenses all year, but you really do want to get a jump start on next year, you want to do at least a low level budget closeout for this year, even if you didn't have a budget, that's okay. And if you have been budgeting and you have all this information, it's going to be really easy for you to just input it into this sheet, or, your own. I mean, you do not need to use this sheet. This sheet is free, and I'll be linking to it in the description below. But honestly, you can just use a notebook and a pen and do the exact same thing. There's nothing magical about downloading or printing this particular sheet. But if you want to track your spending without having tracked it all year, here's my tip for you. There's a couple ways you can do this. If you get paper bills, you can go back to your file where you keep your bills, and you can pull out the bills for this particular year and just fill in the numbers that you paid. If you haven't done a good job of keeping the bills, or it's complicated to do that, really, honestly, for me, the easiest way is just to go online. In my bank account, we have different accounts, but we'll just look at them, and whether it's our credit card expenses or our checking account, I can search different names and it'll bring up all the bills we paid for that. So for instance, I could search for our water company, and it will actually give me all of the amounts. I don't even have to, it's such a streamlined process, so fast. So that's, even though I do track expenses and I might double check, I will probably actually do that for a number of our expenses, because it's just so fast and so easy. So don't feel like if you haven't been tracking all along this year, you can't do this. I would encourage you, strongly urge you, If you would like to get control of your finances, and if you've been frustrated at how your finances have been controlling you, I urge you to do this one little exercise. Even if you do nothing else regarding your finances, this will give you a bird's eye view of everything you have spent this year. And it will just help you so much with creating your budget for next year. So, some other ideas for what you should be looking for as you write down your expenses for the various categories. And again, I mentioned water, but electricity, utilities can include, or even if you don't include them in your utilities category, which I do not, but like phone and internet. If you have any kind of subscription services, that could go on here. And I highly urge you to add onto here all of your set expenses, all of your subscription expenses, mortgages, tithe giving, charitable giving, and then the categories that will be the most complicated to put on a tracker like this, if you have not been carefully tracking your expenses, will be things like groceries, clothes, these random things, odds and ends that maybe you go to Walmart or some other store and you bought groceries, clothes, shoes, and health and beauty items maybe, and you just haven't parsed that all out and figured out which part of that receipt goes where. That's going to be the more complicated ones, and I would say don't worry about that. Go ahead and do all the other ones that are easy to parse out, that are very simple, take you seconds in your bank account. Do those and you'll still be way ahead on this. And next year, if you haven't tracked your expenses this year, next year you can worry about tracking all those variable expenses and all the one-off things and all the miscellaneous expenses. And you could start, and at least you'll have your foundation laid for your budget. So 3 things I want you to look for as you're doing this. The main one is what you paid, and then number 2, who you paid it to. So that's what I was just talking about, like your water bill, what I paid in January, what I paid in February, what I paid in March. And again, if it were me, I'm not going to, like if my bill comes due in February, but it was for January, I'm still going to put it in February. Don't put it, it's what you paid in that month, okay? Those 2 are self-explanatory, but there's one more thing I think you should look for, and that's the date on which you paid it. And I find that it's very, very helpful to have sort of a guiding principle of when those bills will come due. And this will help you next year as you're setting up your budget. So pretty simple. If you find that, like, say, we're just using water as an example. If you find that, say, your water bill comes due on the 10th of every month, approximately, like the 9th, 10th, 11th, depending on a weekend, well, I would just write that, and it's your choice. I frankly just put it a little date up in the top corner of mine, but you can do that however you want. You could do it on a different sheet of paper. You could do it on the back of this, however you want to track that, but I would track sort of the general date at which it's due. And the reason for that is because if you are a paycheck budgeter, and we can talk about this at a future date, but if you are a paycheck budgeter, you are budgeting certain of your bills from each paycheck of the month. I am a monthly budgeter, which is easier in many respects. I get paid once a month. We get paid once a month. And so it's pretty simple for us to parse out our entire monthly budget based on that paycheck. But if you're a paycheck budgeter, you've got multiple paychecks coming in, and you're trying to figure out which bill gets paid when, this exercise will help you so much. It will show you which bills can get paid when, and still everything will get paid, and from which paycheck. But there's a second reason why you need to know the date, and that is because a number of bills that you are paying are not monthly bills. Maybe it's a 6-month payment that you make on your car insurance, or maybe an annual payment that you make. There are certain subscriptions that we have, like a Microsoft subscription, that is due once a year. It can surprise us if we don't know and aren't expecting that to come due in that month. Or like a homeowners association fee that probably comes due once a year. Your certain insurances will do the same thing. Other ones will be like every 6 months or every 3 months. It just depends on how you have yours set up. So my recommendation is that you put the date so that you know which month it's coming due. Next year, when you set up your budget, or at the beginning before January starts, when you set up your budget for next year, figure out when those things are due and set apart the amount of money you need each month until that thing comes due. That's one option. I can talk about other ways of paying those one-off bills, and I will talk about that in a future date. I don't want to get too far sidetracked from what we're doing here. And I feel like I'm talking fast because there's so much information to get to, and I don't want this to be a really long, drawn out video. I want to make good use of our time, both mine and yours. So once you have all of your expenses for 2023, I would like to encourage you to analyze them. And there are a couple questions to ask yourself. Number one is, which months were very high or very low? In other words, which months were the outliers? And see if you can pinpoint why. So for instance, for a lot of us, our electricity will go up during the hot summer months and perhaps during the very cold winter months, depending on what kind of heat we use. And so you will know, oh, these are the months when my bill skyrocketed. Now, for our family, during the other months, the mild months, like the spring months, the early fall months, we like to open our windows, and that just saves us a lot of money on electricity, like lots of money on electricity. So we have a very wildly fluctuating electricity bill, and you might too for whatever reason, but it helps to know that early on. So I would say analyze that. Another question to ask yourself is, what is the highest amount we paid for each of these bills throughout the entire year? So again, as you're looking at your electricity, which month is the highest? And the reason you want to ask yourself that question is that when you budget, a guiding principle is to budget your income low and your bills high. And that pretty much means you're always going to have enough money to cover. So if you take your lowest monthly income and you budget for that amount, you might make more in that month, in which case that money can go into sinking funds, or it could go into miscellaneous, or it could go into savings or paying down your mortgage or whatever. You can make that choice. But at least you have your most necessary bills paid, even in that month when your income is low. So for those of you with wildly fluctuating incomes, remember to budget for your lowest probable income amount. On the other hand, your bills, you budget high. So if I have all different amounts, but I want to kind of keep a general sameness to my budgeted amounts for my bills, I'm going to budget for the highest bill that I had for the whole year. So say maybe April was a $67 electric bill, but August was a $200 electric bill. I've got to at least have that money in there for August. The third question is, what is the average of all the months? And these are decisions that these answers will help you make the decision about how you're going to budget for those things next year. It's really easy when you have subscriptions that are the same every month. It's not going to change. You still want to put that on here because you don't want to forget about it when you're budgeting next year. But it's going to be very easy to know how much that will cost you. But when it comes to those bills that fluctuate, especially if they fluctuate widely, it might help you to average out all the months. So if you are the kind of budgeter who says, I'm going to budget this amount, the same amount for every month, but it's going to average out to that, and I'm just going to keep that extra money in the bank or in an envelope or in a separate account, however you want to do that. And we can talk about more of those possibilities later in a different video. But then that way, you know the average amount that you will be paying throughout the month. So all of those questions, the answers are going to help you depending on how you budget. The way to figure out your average, you probably already know this, but add up all 12 months, then divide by 12, and that's your average. Okay, now, once you get this paper filled out, you can budget for 2024 because you have at least your baseline expenses figured out. You can improve. You can lower your expenses because you now know what they are, and you can shoot that arrow at the target. So, for instance, if your car insurance is really high and you look over this annual expense tracker and you say, wow, I don't want to pay that much car insurance next year. Well, you have options. You can shop for a lower insurance rate. You could maybe change your what you're getting on your insurance, like your deductible, your liability, whatever, you need to adjust. Maybe you could buy a car that's cheaper, and so your insurance will be cheaper. I don't know. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying, like, this is the kind of thing that now that you have the raw data, you can actually improve on that data. So somebody once said something to this effect. I'm a little loosey-goosey on my quotes sometimes, but it was something like, you can't improve what you don't measure. And that is so, so true. So definitely measure so that you can improve. And measure so that you can improve both by lowering the amounts you pay and maybe even cutting some of these expenses. So if you do your subscriptions on here and you find that you have 7 or 8 maybe movie watching subscriptions, is there one you could cancel for a year? Maybe say, okay, this year we're going to focus on these 3 subscriptions and we're going to cancel these 3. And what we're going to watch is going to be dependent on the 3 that we have. I don't know. That's just an idea. It's totally up to you. But, try to see where in your budget, especially if you make your budget and you find out you need some extra space in your budget. Well, then you could look back at here and determine, okay, what can be dropped entirely of all the bills that we pay. Definitely don't drop your electric bill or your water bill, probably not your phone bill. Those things are pretty important. Definitely not your mortgage, but maybe there's something else that's pretty, not quite as important to your life that you would be able to drop. Okay, I hope this helped you. Again, like I said, this is a freebie, and I'll have a download link in the description. And I hope as you're preparing for next year, you're preparing to take control of your finances, this tracker will help you in doing that. Just real quick, what I like to do is put the year up here, and then I write the bills here, and then I put the amounts. And like I said, I try to have a date, and you could do it here or here. What would be nice is if you had the date that this bill is normally due over here and the total for the entire year over here. That's just an idea. It's up to you. There's not a whole lot of space on here, but like I said, you could do this in a notebook with a notebook and paper and pen, and really simple, and then you can have as much space as you want. So I hope that has been a help to you, and we'll talk soon, and we'll get into the next part of our Controlling Your Money in 2024 mini series.